All right, guys, our last speaker today has got 2 sessions. As I said yesterday at the coach at the ranch, I'm really blessed in this way. I actually get to invite speakers that I actually want to listen to. Right? A lot of times you go to places when you got 45 minutes of some guy that you really want to listen to, and then when he's gone, right, then you got to go through 7 or other people you didn't really necessarily want to listen to for that 45 minutes. What really makes this good is we're going to have Dr. Elliott for 2 back-to-back sessions, and Marcus Elliott is I've heard about him. His reputation has preceded him for years. I've heard so many wonderful things about him. Several years ago, Jerry Weinstein invited me to go out to Marcus's place, and they had a little hitting thing there with about a dozen or so people. But I guess more than a dozen, 3 dozen or so, from all different aspects. It was, so I got to listen to Marcus talk. And it was fantastic. He even impressed me. I had very high expectations, and he exceeded them amazing. And I've touched base with him a couple times, but I've always wanted him to get out here and speak with us. And I asked him, and he graciously accepted. I know his schedule is incredible to pull a guy like this away from Santa Barbara, where it's probably certainly a lot warmer than it is here. You're in for a real treat. So you're going to get 2 hours of him. We're going to go 50 minutes, and then 50 minutes. We're going to have 1 break for tape, and then we're going to bring everybody that spoke, except Freddie had to leave, but all the speakers, Wes and Randy and my guys from last night are going to come up on the stage. We'll have a question-answer period after that, so you guys can ask questions. But I'm really excited. I'm going to go back and take some notes, but you're really in for a real treat with this guy. He doesn't do very many of these, and he's a real special intellect, and I know that just in the small bits that I've got to interact with him, he's really impressive. So please give him a round of applause and bring him up. Thank you.
So, I mean, usually these things, you got your little AV team over here, and they're all over it. I've got Trevor Bauer is fixing my PowerPoint for me. We got Ron that's fixing this other piece of technology. Woolforths are all over the place here. It's a pretty unique thing he's got going, which is actually that's what I was going to say. Is I've been hearing about what Ron has out here. After I met him with Jerry Weinstein, and let me also say, I've been involved in baseball for a dozen years, basically. Probably we thought about it for a couple of years, and then we got involved probably 10 years ago, where we took in athletes and started building and building more. And I had this really unique and good fortune to meet a bunch of super smart guys in baseball. When friends of mine heard I was going into baseball, I was coming out of working in football. We worked with the New England Patriots before I got interested in baseball. And I told them, look, we did nice things in football, but I'm interested in baseball. We're going to go work up that sport. And they said, oh boy, oh boy, baseball. And then I had this experience of meeting guys like Jerry Weinstein and Mike Scioscia and Craig Wallenbrock, and a bunch of really bright guys really early on. They were kind of seeking us out, showing up at our place. And I would include Ron in that category. And I thought, wow, we got a lot of smart people in baseball. There's a bunch of innovative thinkers, a bunch of creative thinkers, a bunch of people that have mechanical minds. They're trying to connect all these pieces. I said, baseball is great. The thing is, over these last 10 years, I keep running into these same people over and over and over. And I think that what happened is I just, again, got lucky to run into a lot of these really bright, innovative minds early on, these creative minds. And a lot of these guys continue to be people that we bounce things off of, we try to connect dots with. And so, like I said, Ron was one of these guys we met just a few years ago. And since then, I keep hearing about the Texas Baseball Ranch. We've probably had a dozen athletes at all different levels, from pro guys down to some youngsters, maybe 16, 17-year-old kids that have come out here. And it's definitely accelerating. So I know he's got something unique going here. And every kid that comes out here says they have a great experience. I haven't heard one guy say he didn't have a great experience. So it makes me, again, think that he's got something really unique going on. So then it was a no-brainer to come out and see it for myself. And I don't know if, I guess most all you guys were there last night, freezing your ass off over there with me, right? That's a unique place he's got over there. That's a unique place. It's, in my mind, sees it as a big lab. It's a big lab where they're asking questions and trying to answer those questions, which is what we need more of in baseball. There's no doubt about it. So it's a pleasure to be here. Try to take out one thing from each of my presentations, okay? Take one thing that you own. I've been in academics for a long time, and that's my model. I sit through an hour presentation, I sit through an hour and a half lecture, and I try to walk out with one thing that I can put into my worldview. And I'm gonna try to feed you one or two things that I think are key, but take one piece and own it, okay? I may, I'll try not to get too technical and start speaking Chinese Mandarin up here or anything, okay? I'm gonna try to not get too crazy, esoteric with it. But if I do at times, fall back on the one thing that made sense to you and just own that piece. Yesterday over at Ron's facility, I was super impressed to see some of his students present. Most all you guys were there, right? I think 2/3 of the guys at least. And I would say, let's say from Trevor's presentation, a pronating curveball. I'm gonna hang on to that. I haven't seen that. That was a beautiful view. And the kid that presented before, Trevor's roommate, the B&B team, Mike, always viewing pitching through an athleticism prism. I love that. We treat our pitchers like athletes. And it scares people to see them treated like athletes because that's not normally what we've done. But when we have a really athletic pitcher, I feel very safe doing lots of things with them, including watching them throw baseballs hard. So that's a piece I got there. And then from the first presentation, what was your name again, man? Brent. From Brent's presentation on failure, I got Dr. Seuss and Abraham Lincoln. It's 28 and 8 failures, right? Published 28 turndowns. 8 times running for president, no go. I love the piece on failure, okay? And I thought about it some more this morning. Obviously, this is a really unique sport. We deal with athletes, we work with athletes in all different sports. We deal with some athletes that don't lose a race in 2 years. They haven't had to deal with failure in 2 years. They win 50 events in a row, 38 events in a row. We've had hurdlers that haven't lost in 2.5 years. Baseball, you fail all the time. It's such an integral part of this game, and it's so unique, maybe along with golf in that aspect. The thing about failure, and this is, I'm going off the script here a little bit, which I tend to do, but the thing about failure is you got to pick yourself back up, which I think was a lot of Brent's point. You got to pick yourself back up. You might fail because you're really pushing the boundaries of what you can do or what's humanly possible, period. But you also might fail because you're doing something dumb. And so you got to pick yourself up and you got to ask yourself, am I doing something dumb? And baseball happens to be one of those sports that it's kind of hard to separate those two things from. And I think that's one of the significant obstacles to working in baseball, to be honest. Like if we're working with 100-meter sprinters, we know that this guy's failing this season because his first 20 meters, he's slow. Last year he was a world champion. This year he's consistently 2 100ths behind his times of last year through the first 20 meters. It's easy to see cause-effect. And it's a lot harder in baseball. In baseball, there tends to not be nearly as much accountability as there is in the other sports I've worked in. And I mean that in a positive way and also a negative way. It's like if this guy figures out how to help this pitcher connect he mobilizes his hips and he helps him connect his trunk to his legs. that was the answer. But what happens is if this kid ends up going on and being a top 5 MVP candidate this year after he was completely off the radar, everybody takes credit for it. Everybody kind of jumps in and it was, I told him this and I told him that and I fixed this and he was rushing things and there's not like this direct accountability as to the reality of how this kid got fixed. And the opposite is also true, is that when this kid starts failing really badly, everybody runs from him. People might have answers, but they're not saying, he was rushing. I thought he was rushing things, so I told him to slow it down, and I think I really jacked him up. You don't hear that very much, and especially in major league organizations, or professional organizations. It seems like people run from that. But and it seems like it's to be a recurring theme here. That really is how you learn and sharpen yourself. That's how you learn whether or not you're getting it right. Is to be able to ask those honest questions about whether that guy up. I'm sorry. Whether you screwed that guy up, whether you screwed that guy up, or you actually did something to help him, or if you were kind of neutral in the whole game. You were telling him to do this and he did that, but really what fixed this was this other thing. But that's how you get sharp through life. And that's not just talking about the athletes. I mean, it's really talking about coaches because, you get to be a coach for a long time. You get to be an athlete for a kind of short time. So I think lack of accountability, and also this baseball thing is kind of seen as a mystery. That was complex what Ron was throwing at you. It's all very complex, and so there's sort of this like at some point guys kind of throw their hands up and say, you can't teach 95, or Chapman's a beast. Matt, he's a beast, and maybe he can't teach 95, but there are reasons these things happen. There's Newtonian physics that drive all this stuff. It doesn't happen out of nowhere. And so, that's where we come in. As we try to characterize these systems that help you be the baseball player that you want to be. We try to find tools to measure these systems. We think about the systems that drive the principal movements of the sport, and we try to objectify it all. We create this data stream in our organization, in our facility, that holds us accountable more as to whether or not we're helping this kid or we're not. We look for correlates. We look for things that we're building from a physical development standpoint, from a strength and performance standpoint, and see if it's actually correlating with something on the field. So I think this accountability, both on the negative side and on the positive side, and kind of taking the mystery out of baseball, those are rules that we're playing, and we're not. There's still mystery in baseball, and there's still not as much accountability as there could be, maybe, or there are in some of the other sports. So it's not like we turn the key and it happens, but we're definitely applying a data-driven, logic-based model to understanding our baseball players. And I'll just give you a couple little pieces of that today. Maybe you can grab on too. My background, I trained in sports science. Since I was about 16, I thought I would do what I'm doing. I thought I would study the hell out of the human body and be smarter about how we build athletes. Okay, I thought I'd be a super overtrained personal trainer. So studied biomechanics and studied physiology, and then decided to go to medical school, train in medicine, and then sports medicine. And worked with lots of Olympic athletes in parallel. Did a whole lot of work in Olympic sports before I got into the U.S. pro sports. All the way through my education, working with pro athletes. As early as like 18, working with elite swimmers, and I learned how to use long words and talk in a deep voice, because a lot of them are older than me, and I'm kind of directing their program. And now I don't have to do that anymore. Try to use shorter words and talk in a quieter voice. We took over after I got out of medical school. We took over the Patriots program, New England Patriots. I got interested in football. We did a big injury study for the NFL-wide injury project over the course of 10 years, studying hamstring injuries in football players. And we took the Patriots and went from having an off-season program that you either got the program out of the desk that was for strength athletes, or you got the program out of the desk that was for speed athletes. That's how it worked. But in reality, these guys are all different. They're all different animals, right? So what we did is we tested all of them early in the off season. We set up individual programs for each of them, and they went from having a lot of muscle injuries to having almost no muscle injuries, and winning a couple Super Bowls, and had some pretty athletic kids. And then I had that conversation about wanting to get into baseball. And people saying, oh boy. And so that was like 12 years ago now. So we've done a lot in baseball. We have a facility out in California where we have a bunch of technology. We try to borrow technology from biomechanics labs, from medical labs, to help us understand the athlete that's in front of us. And we have this luxury in our facility, we have this luxury of doing these deep dives with athletes, where somebody shows up and we're going to spend a few hours absolutely taking them apart so we know everything about them from a physical standpoint. And we do some stuff with brain too that maybe I'll show you later too. But that's a luxury. You know, you don't get that in an organization. You don't even really get that in a college program. You got a lot of kids you got to manage, right? So we have this luxury of having, and also we have a lot of bright people that work with us. You know, we got all these kids out of good schools that are very committed to what they're doing. So we have these round tables where we talk about athletes. We get to sharpen each other that way. You know, briefly, philosophy in power sports is we try to build the biggest motor we can, and then you make sure that the athlete can apply that motor in their sport. Okay, it sounds simple. It's not that simple. You know, the first part, building a big power motor, that's actually pretty straightforward. But making sure they can apply it in their sport, that gets more complicated. But that's the model we use. It doesn't matter if it's an Olympic sprinter, it doesn't matter center fielder in Major League Baseball or NBA point guard. I mean, that's the model. You want to have these guys as powerful as possible, but they have to be able to use this power effectively, right? I mean, it's easy to make a beast that becomes a worst athlete. Happens all the time. We see it all the time. Okay, this is probably, if you're going to take away one thing from this presentation, I think this is a good one to take away. This is a motion capture kinematic sequence of a baseball player. Who's seen this before? Kinematic sequences. Has anybody seen this? Okay, there's a couple. Was that at Titleist maybe?
That was Tom Howes.
Yeah, Tom. So Tom's another one of those guys I met early. I love Tom. So down at Titleist, we've gotten together with the Titleist guys in the past. This probably first time was, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. We compared, it's probably 8 years ago, we compared mechanics, rotational mechanics of golfers. You know, they basically analyze all their top pros down there to baseball players. And they're really similar. Tom was part of that discussion too. I think he was maybe even the facilitator. But they're really similar. And so Titleist has done a lot with this, and I probably should tip my hat to Greg Rose for really driving this home with us too. But this is a great model for a rotational athlete. Okay, this is how rotation works. This is how we get these 140-pound Dominicans that throw the ball 97. Okay, it makes no sense, but they do it, and this is how it works. This is a really efficient rotational kinematic sequence. This first, you guys can't see very well over there, huh? Is it reproduced okay? Yeah. So this first, there's a vertical black line, okay? Beyond that black line, when everything starts going up, all those pieces going up, that's showing rotational velocity, or angular velocity of the hips, then the trunk, and then the arms. Okay? Hips, trunk, arms. The hips are in red. Trunk's in green, arms are in blue, and this actually was this is a hitter, and so that's the red, the final red, the high velocity thing is actually his bat. Okay, it's an implement. It'd be the same with a golfer. It looks the same with a golfer. Some of the characteristics of this, all the stuff that Ron's talking about, it all, except for some of this, a little bit of this, but even this comes back into this simple model, okay? Simple model. How do all these pieces connect? Everything that we talk about when we're thinking about developing a baseball player revolves around this. Listen, the development of baseball, you guys probably know this, but I mean the development of baseball players, it's starting to change right now. But as we got into it, the basic model it's a strength model. It's a basic strength model. And I haven't worked in a sport where our development model, our strength model, our strength power development model is a separate and as far from what you actually do in your sport as baseball. You know, we do a lot of basic strength development. You know, a lot of times it looks like my high school football program, and yet the demands of the sport are incredibly unique. You know, you have to be a beautiful rotational athlete. We have guys that walk into our facility and you don't think they could play on their varsity high school team. You know, you don't think they're going to make a varsity in any sport. And then you watch them rotate. Nothing looks great, and then you watch them rotate and you see these beautiful athletes. This thing works really well. You got to be able to do this well if you're going to be a baseball player, at least a successful one. So rotational kinematic sequencing. Some of the characteristics of it. First, the temporal sequence, okay? Your peak velocity, peak angular velocity of your hips comes before your trunk, comes before your arms, before you implement, okay? That makes sense to all of you, right? I can tell you that we have professional athletes, even guys that are making a nice living in the sport, that don't sequence like that. Where they have overlapping sequences, where maybe the angular velocity of their hips and their trunk are exactly overlaid. There's no temporal separation. Usually those guys have really tight hips. Sometimes it's motor programming. They just have lousy throwing mechanics. But in our model, it usually ends up being they have really tight hips. So we run into some pretty decent baseball players that don't do this really well, but all of the best players do this well. All the efficient athletes do this well. So you got temporal sequence. Each in this temporal sequence, the angular velocity of each segment, each successive segment, is higher than the previous segment. So the angular velocity of the trunks is faster than the hips, but it's slower than the arms, right? That all makes sense. This piece, a lot of people don't get, but the way this works is there's the transfer of momentum. Okay, you accelerate a piece, and then you have to stop it to transfer momentum. If you accelerate your hips and they don't decelerate, there's no transfer of momentum. Okay, so right after a segment reaches peak velocity, it needs to decelerate pretty quickly to transfer momentum. And this is firm front side for hitters. And it's also firm, stable front side for pitchers. If you can't decelerate that segment, you don't transfer momentum. And that piece is, like I said, is a little bit more complicated for people. And in each athlete, it ends up that's the most complex piece for sure. But that's absolutely essential. Go ahead and just plug through these. One thing about this will make sense to you, but besides an inefficient momentum transfer, which is a lot of what you guys talk about in here, besides inefficient momentum transfer, if one segment isn't generating adequate power, adequate angular velocity, then it ends up showing up out here. So if your trunks, say your hips are accelerating at 10% less angular velocity than they used to, it shows up out here. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It's probably more like 4-to-1. At least that's what our numbers look like. So if you increase your lower body power by 10%, you increase your angular velocity potentially of your hips by close to 10%, but it doesn't transfer into 10% gain in velocity. Maybe it's a 2 to 3, 4%. That seems to be pretty consistent. But of course, that also depends on things being efficient downstream from your hips. So this is one piece that I've been interested in baseball. I'm more than anything, well, I'm interested in a lot of it, but I'm really interested in how the lower half works. I mean, lower half. If this thing doesn't work well, things downstream aren't going to work well. You don't get to really make it up. Some guys do. Some pitchers do. Some hitters do by just having really good hands. But you never get that power back. You never get that speed. You never get that speed back, that velocity back. So I'm really interested in how the lower half works. And one of these things that we've studied is what we call horizontal force or horizontal drive, lateral drive. And that's this concept is that it's important to be really powerful in your lower half. Here's back up a step. It's important to be strong in your lower half, but really it's about power, right? It's really about power. It's about being able to get up to big velocities, which is power. You can be really strong and not be that powerful. The correlation is pretty loose. So we run into some big, strong athletes that aren't that powerful. You guys do too, I know that. And so it's really about power. If you have a lot of lower body power, say you jump 36 inches, which is being in the top probably 2% of major league players, 1% maybe. Say you jump 36 inches. If you can't take this power and apply it in this lateral plane, you're not going to be able to use it this way. You're not going to be able to use it that well with a baseball in your hand. So if you have a lot of power and you can only apply it in the vertical plane, then you don't get to use that power very easily. Does that make sense? And so for the last over 10 years, we've been measuring lateral force, horizontal force in our athletes. When we measure vertical jumps. We do a lot of things we do tons of stuff off force plates. We have motion analysis systems, EMG. We have some sci-fi technology. It's really fun, and it keeps evolving too. But we always come back to this. It seems like the correlation between horizontal force, lateral force, or impulse. Horizontal impulse, which is basically how much it's area under the curve, under the force curve. So I'll show you this in a minute, but impulse seems to correlate really well with velocity also. The way we test this in our athletes is we have them do a one-off skater. You guys maybe have do some skaters in baseball? I don't know. Skater plyometrics, you guys seen this before? Basically, so a lot of heads nodding. I mean, there's one thing that we push really hard on baseball, and maybe there's other people pushing on it too. But we definitely push really hard on it. And basically what we do is we're bringing in a ball player, put him in a motion analysis environment, put him on force plates so we can make a video game out of him doing this if we wanted to. Because we can ask crazy detailed questions. We have him drive as hard as he can laterally. We just have him go, boom, and create as much lateral force as possible. And more than that, hopefully. And then we get let me give you this on pitchers and hitters too, really quickly, because I don't want to get stuck on it. But this horizontal force is really well characterized in pitchers. We weren't the first people to think about this. Okay, other people have thought about it as well. The force that you drive with laterally, as well as the force that you decelerate with, correlate really well with fastball velocity, even in a really homogeneous group. So we take a bunch of pro players that throw between 85 and 98. You're going to be able to generally pick out the guy who throws the hardest based on lateral force. And we've tested a ridiculous number of athletes now. And so we get to see how tight this correlation is. And it's pretty tight, okay? It hasn't been as well characterized in hitters. But hitters can't have a lot of vertical movement when they're using their lower half. Otherwise, they miss baseballs, right? So they can't create a lot of vertical force. They have to be able to create this lateral force and get big hip rotation. But they don't use their lower half. You asked us, Ron asked about this, difference between hitters and pitchers. This is one difference, is that when they actually do their sport, the rotation is amazingly similar. But when they actually do their sport, hitters don't generate as much force out of their lower half. I mean, you got some beastly hitters they've got a lot of good stuff going on down here, and that's a foundation that everything works from. But they don't create as much force out of their lower half as our pitchers do. Our best pitchers use almost everything they have. I mean, it's all out effort below the hips. Really quickly, I just threw this in. This on hitters is looking at this is just a little project we did with guys that went from AAA to the big leagues that we had force plate numbers on. We just looked at a little sample, basically guys that were making this jump to having careers in baseball, and want to see how tightly horizontal force correlated with slugging percentage. And we did this regression analysis. You see that line through there? I mean, it's a pretty tight correlation in this group. If we have 200 of these data points, I'm not sure what it looks like. It's not going to be that tight, that's for sure. But this R-squared value of 0.95 means that you can attribute 95% of their power. You can predict. You can attribute 95% of what we see in their slugging percentage to the fact that they're creating bigger force than the guy who has a little bit less horizontal force than they do, and a subsequent lower slugging percentage. Okay? So this is what it looks like when we measure it. You're going to click on that. Usually when we get a guy in and test them, we test them for about 2 hours, maybe a little bit longer. Test mobility over all joints, do a bunch of performance tests, and then have them interact with some of our technology too. Wolforth, AV specialist. Okay, I'll tell you this is what the video looks like, okay? There's a guy, it's actually Nick Swisher, okay? Standing here like this, might have been chewing gum, and then he just goes really low, about basically like that. Doesn't get a lot of carry, just big lateral drive. And why don't you just go ahead and go forward, okay? Unless you want to try to get that, okay? Maybe we'll see if we can pick that up. But this is what we get out of it, okay? This is a force in all three planes, and we took out the lateral plane. This red tracing is horizontal force or lateral force. This blue is vertical force. This guy creates a lot of force in a pretty short period of time. I've seen thousands, maybe tens of thousands of these things, okay, on all different types of athletes. And probably, we probably have, I don't know, 400 pro baseball players in our database, somewhere in that neighborhood, say, yeah, somewhere close to 400. What we like about this is his, first off, that he creates a lot of force. He's almost 1,200 newtons, which probably puts him in the top 3 or 4% of major league players that we've tested. He also gets a separation where his horizontal force is bigger than his vertical force. You know, I was saying that it seems to be a really important thing for hitters, maybe a little bit less so for pitchers. Pitchers have to be able to create this big lateral force, but if they create vertical force, they don't pay as much price for it as the hitters do. So we like that he gets a separation, this horizontal bigger than vertical, and we like that he does it in a really short period of time. Big force, gets there fast. He's in a reactive sport. Okay, so this is how we measure horizontal force. We can look at area under the curve, under the red line. So basically looking at, that's what we call impulse. Or we can just look at peak forces, which is just short of 1,200 newtons in this case. So we did this for quite a while. And what we found is that most of our pitchers that throw the ball hard create big horizontal force. But once in a while, we find guys that create a whole lot of horizontal force, don't throw the ball very hard. Okay? So it's kind of shooting holes in our initial model. And so we did a couple things. We played around with putting a force plate in a mound. We also started doing these towel drills, and we found that guys are actually, in terms of force production, it's really similar what they do off a mound as to what they do off flat ground when they're going full speed in a towel drill. And can we see this maybe? Why don't you just run it off the Bauer AV? Just run it off the flash drive if you can't get it play out of there.
Is it called horizontal force?
I think it's a Zito. I think it's a Zito towel drill. So basically, what we do is we have them warm up really well. Most all these guys have done some towel drills in their life. And what we're looking for is we want to see of this motor. You know, we're trying to measure this motor that pitchers use when they try to go 95 here. We're trying to measure this motor. We want to see how much force they create. Now we want to see, in doing this drill, we want to see how much of that motor they actually use. And here's the punchline, is we have probably have to come out of a presentation mode, huh? So what we find, if we have a guy that creates 1,200 newtons of horizontal force, you know, if he's off the charts in terms of how horizontal force he creates, we got a pitcher that just blows up these plates, but he throws 85. Almost invariably, when we test him off the skater drill, he doesn't use those 1,200 newtons. So he's got this big motor, but somehow his pitching mechanics don't incorporate it. Does that make sense? We've had a bunch of guys that come to us that are training monsters, that are already beast mode guys, and they don't throw the ball that hard. We test them. They're putting in ridiculously big numbers, and we do these towel drills with them, and they put up these small numbers, and we say, look, this is a job for mechanical analysis for a pitching coach. This is a job for a pitching coach. So what we do is we get together with the pitching coach. We look for holes in his physical body, get together with the pitching coach, and try to help him solve that. But it's not a job for us to make them more beast mode. They're already beast mode. They just don't know how to use it. It's okay if you can't get it there, guys. Why don't you just go forward, Trevor?
We'll see, Doc. We'll see if we can fill that out in a break.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll try to pick it up, okay? You can just go forward, Trevor. Thanks for effort there. So, like I say, you probably have to get out of presentation mode up here, huh? So this is an example. So what we'll do is we'll look at what he does in a one-off skater. We just want to measure how much power he can create when he's not worried about pitching mechanics. And then we measure when you take him through a towel drill or have him throw to a catcher. We do this inside as well, and look to see how much force he creates. These are actual numbers on the guy who we can't see there. Okay, he does a nice stare down, even though. Hopefully we'll see it here in a little bit. But in his case, what he does, he doesn't put up a lot of force. He puts up a really small amount of force, to be honest. But he uses all of it. He actually creates more force when he's pitching than when he does a skater. Okay, so when he does a one-off skater trying to just blow this thing up, he doesn't create as much force as when he does this. That's a great model, because we know in this guy, if we give him more power, it translates. He uses everything he has. His mechanics are super efficient to use his lower half. Those athletes we love working with, because we know those are our guys. We have the answer for them. You know, we have the key for these guys. The guy who shows up that's already beast here but doesn't incorporate it, we don't always have those answers. Sometimes we can help with them, but it has to go back to the mechanics side. It has to go back to motor programming. This is a little slide of fastball velocity versus horizontal force skaters. These are all major league guys that we tested. We did this probe where we tested force, just like I'm showing you. This is in a this is in a towel drill. So we're measuring horizontal force, and we're looking to see how well it correlates with fastball velocity. And this trend line is actually really good. There's a few guys. The guys that are outliers are the guys that create a lot of force but don't throw the ball that hard. There's a few points down there that kind of throw off the correlation. There's just a few guys. And those are almost invariably guys that have some messed up mechanics downstream. Okay? Just like I was saying a minute ago. They create a lot of force, even create a lot of force when they're doing a towel drill, but something's not working from the hips on up. Somehow they're not able to use this machine that they have. There's a couple outliers on the top side too, meaning they throw a little bit harder than would be predicted by a trend line from what their lower half does. And those are guys that are probably, one, really efficient transfer momentum, but also guys that are picking up a little bit more up here. They figured out how to get a little bit more out of a hip flexion or some of the other ways that we create velocity. Creating horizontal force. I mean, it's kind of simple. We measure the skater. Let me say this too. Listen, when we first started measuring the skater, we weren't that consistent in our measuring. We just didn't know what parameters to put on the athlete. And if the athlete does little things like crosses over, and if we don't set it up right and we don't cue the movement right, then it can throw off our data. So we have to cue everything in a pretty unique way. So if anybody decides to take it on, this force plate project, then ask us. You know, we'll tell you what we do to cue them, because it took us a few years to get there, but now we're pretty consistent with it. This creating horizontal force, it's actually pretty complex too. It's easy to measure now, but it's pretty complex. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong. You know, you got to be a beast in the lower half. You got to be able to create a lot of power. But if you don't have, say, good ankle mobility, you can't create this big horizontal force. Guys that don't have enough ankle mobility, enough dorsiflexion, can't pick their toes up, they don't create huge horizontal force. They can't use it. We've got some hitters that our only target is to give them more ankle mobility. They've got lots here. They're nice baseball players. Some of the guys are projected to be the guys right now, and plenty of power here, but they can't use it when they hit. Their ankles aren't mobile enough, and so they can't create this drive. They just kind of spin around this thing, cause all kinds of problems for them. So ankle mobility, it's a big thing. Usually people in the strength and conditioning world don't think about their job being to open up ankles, but they should in our sport. Hip mobility, also a big deal. Hip stability, if your hips aren't stable, can't create this big horizontal force. You get some inappropriate pelvic tilts, not appropriate ones. Leg drive of internal rotators. Internal rotators in your drive leg, super important. There's a couple mentions of them yesterday, but really important. And then also motor programming. Athletes need to be able to relax. They need to have really nice tempo in order to create these big forces in the lateral plane. And these are all systems we can train, by the way. Those are all systems that we can train in our environment. Over here. I was gonna give you some data on this, but I think that I don't want to go too deep into my next hour already. Okay. A few years ago, I took over as a director of sports science for the Seattle Mariners. Okay. I did it because we need to bring more of an analytical model to baseball, try to basically improve the development model, the training side of it. I was the first director of sports science in Major League Baseball. I think I might have been in football too. I'm not positive on that one, but in baseball, I'm sure I was. I wasn't the first in basketball, but I've done that for the NBA too. We do some stuff in basketball. So we took over this organization. Okay, problems with organizations really quickly is you got a whole lot of athletes. And you have a whole lot of people that are employed by the organizations. And it's just a pretty cumbersome system. You know, our system's really simple. Guys walk in the door, put a whole lot of resources into them, really get it right with them. They show up with a whole lot of juice. It's just like what happens out here at Ron's place. You know, they show up with a whole lot of juice and meet our effort level, and they walk out better. You know, it's a nice exchange, and they write you a check too. It's the last part. But in an organization, you got, you know, if you're going to take care of the whole organization, you got a few hundred athletes you have to deal with, right? That's hard. You also, in Major League Baseball and pro baseball organizations, you don't have full-time strength coaches at all levels. So that's actually why we did it with Seattle, is they agreed to hire full-time guys at every level, and that they, you know, pay them a living wage and give them benefits and all that stuff. Because the only way you create a great team is to have people that stick around, right? That are all on the same page, all doing the same thing, and you create continuity with them. But normally in a Major League Baseball organization, you got a Major League guy, you got a coordinator, maybe have a AAA guy. They're trying to get AA guys now, but it was frequently you have 2 full-time guys in an organization. Now it's 3 guys, maybe 4, and they hired 8 guys full-time. Okay, so that's the reason we did this with Seattle. In order to train your athlete well, here's another take-home message. Okay, this one you take it to the bank, because it's definitely a direction your sport's going to go. All sports, in fact, not just sports, like all of our cultures, it's going towards personalizing all of this stuff. Okay, the development of your baseball player has to be personalized. You have to be going after targets that your player needs. It's going to keep going that way more and more and more. You got to go after targets that your athlete needs. We showed up at the first mini camp, okay, with our top 40 prospects, and they were so all over the place that we just did this emergency triage where we said, okay, what we're going to do is divide these guys into 3 groups before we start. We tested them before we start really training, and we got these guys that are mobility guys. Okay, these guys just need mobility. Strong guys, powerful, but no mobility. They can't use their power. We got these guys that are stability guys. These guys can't stabilize. They're hypermobile, but they can't stabilize any of these links. Okay, and we got these guys that are all clear. These guys we're going after right now. We're going to start building strength, power, and just treat them like athletes. And the smallest group is this group over here. These guys we're just going to go after like athletes. And these are the top guys in the organization. And most of those guys, not all of them, but most of them are guys that came out of signed out of high school, or they're Latin players. There's a few college guys in there. The guys that need mobility, who are those guys? What do you got? College guys. So you got college guys coming out of these big lifting programs that show up really strong, but they got no mobility, can't use the stuff they have. I mean, your sport is a power sport. You've got to be this powerful, bouncy athlete to have the systems that you really need as a baseball player. And so a whole lot of the college guys, they're all about mobility. We just got to loosen these guys up. They got plenty of strength. We're not going to have them in there doing 4 sets of 10 reps of this and this and this and this. We're going to just push really hard on creating mobility. Turns out that a lot of college players get addicted to lifting too, right? So they think that's what makes them, your testosterone comes up after you lift, you feel like a monster. But if you can't use your body, it doesn't matter if you feel like a monster. And then we got these guys over here that usually don't have very much development history. Some of these Latin players, a lot of Latin players, some of the high school science. You talk to these guys, look, man, I've never did anything. I played basketball and then I went out and threw 95, that's all I did. We can work with those guys all day long. Those are easy. It's like everything's clean slate. So basically we set up this triage where we put them in these 3 different groups. In this organization, we tested 30 different objective variables, 20 different subjective variables, and set up individual needs for over 250 athletes. Okay, so every athlete in our system we set up individual programs for. It's just not the way it works normally. Not even close, right? And the nice thing about this is, see, we're measuring these things, and we're using these measurements to dictate what the player needs and how we're going to train them, and then we get to measure these things again. So you got a guy that's got crap hip mobility, and your number one need in your needs hierarchy for this individual player is hip mobility, and his hips aren't getting more mobile. Then you go back to the drawing board. You have this checks and balances to see if you're actually getting where you're trying to go, or you're just spinning your wheels for this kid. If the kid's working hard and he's not getting where he's supposed to be going, then we better get on our game. And so when you set up these data flow programs, these rational thought programs, it's a way to get sharp from your failures. Like we were talking about, like we started this thing off, like as per last night. That's how you get sharper from your mistakes, is you have a rationale for everything you do, and you have a bad outcome, and then you go back and look at your rationale, right? So every one of these guys, you give them individual programs, and we do a lot of plyometrics with our athletes. There weren't a lot of baseball players doing plyometrics, maybe some guys in some college programs. They're starting to do it more and more now. But these are things that, let me just give you this, okay? These are things that we did with our athletes that aren't normally done, that probably caused the most friction, because we went in kind of aggressively with this program. Number one, we don't do long distance running with our athletes. We're going to talk about that in a little while, okay? Except in a few cases. We do overhead stability movements with our athletes, okay? So we've got a bunch of pitchers. You got this guy, you just gave him a $3 million signing bonus, and his first spring training or first mini camp, he's got 30 pounds in each hand, and he's doing split squats. And everybody freaks out. I'm just gonna tell you, everybody freaks out. We've never had an athlete hurt doing an overhead stability movement in 2 decades of doing it, not once. This is not dangerous. We don't trust the guys going in there and kind of willy-nilly doing this stuff, but overhead stability movements, you know what's dangerous? It's not this. It's throwing a baseball 95 miles an hour without all these systems being built to manage it. And so we went right after those things. And I'll hang my hat on it. More organizations are doing these now, doing overhead stability movements, even doing overhead presses. We don't do a lot of overhead presses with our athletes. The best predictor, this is another one you can put away, okay, maybe with kinematic sequencing. But we study injuries like crazy, okay? We spend a lot of time thinking about injuries. But the best predictor of injuries in every sport is a delta. And delta is just the difference. It's a change, okay? It's a change. The best predictor of injury in your sport is a change in baseline, okay? You got an athlete that's never done an overhead stability movement. You don't get him in there with 100 kilos overhead. But if he's doing 85 kilos last week, he might be doing 100 kilos this week. Okay, they can't have these radical changes, either in volumes, intensity, in training modalities. They have to be subtle changes. Okay? The best predictor of injury is a significant change in training patterns. Go back, let me see if I had anything there I needed. So let me, just for a second on plyometrics, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, but we do a lot of plyometrics with our athletes. So if you showed up, we showed up at our facility, I think you guys do a little jumping, huh? So plyometrics and jumping scare baseball people, okay? Especially pitching people. We have a great pitching coordinator. I just saw, just before I came up here, the Mariners have a pitching coordinator. His name's Rick Waits. He's a really smart guy. Smart, committed. He's been in the game a long time. He's one of those guys that, he's just got all the right tools to be great. But he just got promoted to the major league team. I just saw he's a Mariners new pitching coach. He was our coordinator last few years. And he's going to do a great job. But most pitching coaches, or strength coaches in baseball, if they see you doing big plyometrics with their pitchers, big jump training with their pitchers, it scares them, right? Terrifies them. We never have athletes hurt doing plyometrics. You have to teach them how to interact with the ground. If their ground-foot interactions are messed up, they're crazy dangerous. Okay, if they don't know how to interact with the ground, they're really dangerous. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But as long as they when they're coming in, contacting the ground, they're dorsiflex, they know how to interact with the ground, everything else will work fine. So we do a lot of power development with our baseball players, with all our athletes, but including baseball players. We do a lot of athletic movements with our pitchers. We want them to be athletes. We want to be able to cut, change direction, manage changes in their center of mass, be able to deal with those type of things, because those are kind of things they actually deal with when they pitch. But baseball normally doesn't do plyos. Let me see if there's anything else on the baseball horizon that. So those are, those aerobic running, overhead stability movements, plyometrics. Those are things that aren't normally done in baseball, at least at the pro level. That we came in and said we're going to do these things. We're going to make some of these changes, and we've gotten a number of calls from other. Oh, here's another thing: aggressive rotational training. Normally, you don't train pro baseball players with aggressive rotational training. We're trying to maximize power, whether they're medicine ball throws or any kind of rotational power. Whenever we do rotational training with our athletes, as long as they're stable and pieces are in place, we're headed towards power. We're not trying to just make them strong. Very rarely. We're always headed towards power. So it's scary. So we saw some guys doing, you'll see some guys doing side tosses like this. The ball bounces, catch it, like this. It's like they're going fishing, Just like this, catch it. And we get guys we want them to sequence in the same sequence that we're shooting for. Hips, trunk, arms. We have them blow them up. When we have guys that are throwing in the side toss, we have radar guns on all our walls to measure these things. And when guys go from 28 to 32 in a side toss movement, they built some rotational system that should serve them throwing a baseball. So we do really aggressive rotational power training too. And again, these are things, these things we've done. I don't want to. They're just things that seemed obvious to me. And they're mostly things that make complete sense. And it's not me being smart. They're just like, I'm just coming in and looking at this sport and saying, okay, what are the tools that you need in this sport? How would we go about building them? But I come in with, as an outsider. And, maybe I have one foot on the inside too. We worked at a lot of different levels in baseball now. But I definitely come in with an outside view. And I'm not claiming to have invented any of this stuff. I didn't invent, let's not do aerobic running. I didn't invent, let's do aggressive rotational training. I didn't invent, let's do overhead stability. But it all makes sense in your sport. And I think they're all things that'll keep moving into the sport. But, they should already be in there. So we're going to, why don't you give me one more slide, okay? I can give you guys want to see data? I don't know if you guys want to see organizational data stuff. I threw in, there's a bunch of slides looking at changes in horizontal force, like in an organization, through 250 athletes. Because we keep numbers on all these players, so we can start asking ourselves about which systems are we able to change as an organization, which ones don't move that much, and so on. And I just threw this slide in just to make the case that there's a whole lot left on the table in most of our pro baseball players with regards to lower half development. Okay, and that's really the only case I want to make. If we go over, if we work with the Patriots and we see a change in 40 times of 1% for the whole organization, we feel good about it, right? 1%, maybe 2%. And the first season we went in Seattle, the whole organization, this is testing on the same field, same time of year, year to year. Okay, exactly same timing system. Everything's the same. Every athlete's included in the data. We changed our 20-yard sprints. Got over 7% faster. Okay, so you're dropping close to 10% in terms of your sprint time. That means more lower body power. Everything went up a lot. These are all objective variables. Okay, we didn't put any subjective stuff in here. Rotational power went up 5% on one side and almost 10% on the other side. Our pitchers tend to get more powerful through the season than our position players because we can train them harder. So all the numbers we have here, the pitchers tend to trend with bigger gains than the position players. We train the guys hard during the season, but they had their most successful year ever. They set a win-loss record for a whole minor league organization. Okay, it's the best win-loss record that they've ever had, not just the Mariners, but in pro baseball 2 years ago. And so we're training these guys hard through the season. They're making physical gains, but they're still able to go out and compete because it's baseball. It's baseball. They're not doing something that's going to be, other than the starting pitchers, and catchers, they're not doing something that's going to beat them into the ground. So they can show up after doing some work and still be powerful. So I've got a bunch more of sort of outcome stuff, but it'll look like I'm showing off to show it, so I'm going to keep it to myself.